Well, thank you everyone for joining this morning. Thanks for attending this webinar on the impact of artificial intelligence on governance, risk, and compliance. My name is Jean Hughes Migeon. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Anove International, that is sponsoring this webinar. I am a privacy lawyer. I'm a data protection specialist at the European Space Agency as an external. I used to work as a security and privacy officer for Onto IT, a cybersecurity Dutch company based nearby Utrecht, specialized in zero trust architecture. And before that, I worked at Nationale Nederlanden. I think we have a couple of our participants that are from the Netherlands, so you probably know it. But for those who don't know, it's an insurance company, very old insurance company in the Netherlands. So today we have quite an interesting program. We will take a look at artificial intelligence first on a global perspective. So we will take a look at, okay, what are the geopolitical different geopolitical approach of artificial intelligence and how the legislation is being developed. We will take a look at the three main leaders in artificial intelligence. I mean, Europe, the United States, and China. We will spend a bit more time on Europe because I've noticed that most, if not all, our participants are on the European markets. Then what we will do is, after we have established what is coming in terms of legislation or what is actually already there, we will dive into how does artificial intelligence will impact the organizations themselves. So we will look at the risk and opportunities for our organizations. We will perform a small SWOT analysis. We will establish the new risks that are coming with artificial intelligence. And then we will take a look at, okay, how does it affect our GRC program as they stand today. And finally, we will do a recap on what we have discussed in the first two sections. Throughout the webinar, I will also show how Anove takes a stance towards artificial intelligence applied to GRC. The objective is, of course, of showing how we think it should be involved. There are probably many ways of doing it, but we decided to do it this way. And actually the whole purpose of this webinar and of the Q&A section is also to exchange with you, because we are always open on hearing the different point of view. But as you can read, basically we will see that there are three emerging models of AI regulations. That, of course, and I think you already know it, AI will drastically modify our risk landscape, which inherently will bring to a drastic change in our way of working. So before we dive into the geopolitics, I always like to start with a bit of numbers, although, well, they might or might not mean a lot, but in that case, I think what's impressive is the volume of data that is being produced. So these numbers all come from a report that has been provided by the OECD. And basically what we see is that in the coming years, actually by 2025, we will have produced 175 zettabytes of data. It is an astonishing number, completely astronomical in terms of comprehension, impossible for the human brain to comprehend. A zettabyte is basically 1,000 billion gigabytes, so it's really enormous. In comparison, in 2018, so only 6 years ago, we produced 33 zettabytes, so it's a ratio from 1 to 5. AI will replace about 14% of existing jobs. That's at least what it is. So fully replacing this job, we talk about monotonous tasks that are being performed. AI will also affect 32% of the job in a substantial way. So meaning, I think, in our case, also GRC, all the roles related to GRC. but it also will be for the best, as it is projected to increase from 11 to 37% the labor productivity. So artificial intelligence is definitely a revolution that we need to dive into. So first, let's start with our geopolitics and the legislation about artificial intelligence. Today, I won't dive too much into each legislation on the European, US, and Chinese markets. And for that, we have a specific other session where we just take a look at really, okay, what is being done in terms of artificial intelligence regulation in the US, in the EU, and in China. We have a webinar that is scheduled for March 20th, so in about 3 weeks from now, where we will really go deep into the topic. Today, we will simply take a look from a global perspective. So, as I mentioned, we have three different approaches, three different conceptual models. We have the European approach, that is more an horizontal regulation, which basically means that we have three blocks of regulations, so the EU AI Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the Digital Service Act, that will all regulate the different aspects of the market. EU acts as actually a pioneer in data regulation because they set a precedent in terms of data privacy with GDPR. They also inspired many other data protection regulations, such as the California CCPA. EU also focuses on, well, being competitive and a lot on interoperability, which basically means that they want to avoid as much as possible vendor lock-in. Why? Well, basically because the main players, of course, in the digital landscape are American, but we try to place European companies also on the same market, and we want to avoid monopolies from the US-based companies. There's also something very important at stake, is the digital sovereignty. EU is falling behind in terms of production of hardware. Notably, I'm thinking about chipsets for computers and for computing power. That's why Europe will come with a European Chips Act that tries to relocate part of the production of chips in the European Union. And finally, Europe also imposed their own regulations globally. So from the moment that you are a company that will be targeting the EU markets, you will have to comply to EU regulations. For the United States, it's a complete different approach, where instead of regulating as much as European Union is doing, they do a more laissez-faire approach, which means that they focus more on innovation, on industrial and private sector control. Basically, we will have a more vertical regulation. So we will do it sector by sector, and in a decentralized way, meaning that we will have state-level regulations instead of federal. We'll have state-level regulation where each state will come with their own sets of rules regarding artificial intelligence. The problematic is also slightly different from the US. They don't have this focus, or they don't need to have this focus on competition or on sovereignty, as they are definitely the leader in the digital services domain still nowadays. But they focus a lot on problematics linked to facial recognition, racial bias, and discrimination. As it is a societal problematic in the US as well. And therefore, they will really put strong requirements on AI applied to people. And always what the US does, especially when in terms of public contract, they will always favor national companies, and they will put strong restriction on external companies. Not so much on European, but for example, on Chinese company, I'm thinking about Huawei or Tencent that faced some sanctions in the US. And finally, in China, we have a definitely centralized approach that is focused on national security. So we have first and very early player, with the first legislation on artificial intelligence or algorithms was passed in 2017, where they will position their core companies into the market as front runners. So they will not, they will favor certain companies such as Baidu, Alibaba, Huawei. They will hold companies liable for what they are producing, but also for the content that is being generated on their own platforms. I'm thinking here, for example, that there is a strong, let's say, content moderation in China, and a strong control over the recommendations from the algorithms, meaning that basically companies are liable for content that might be criticizing, for example, the central government on their own platforms. So China really has a different problematic. So you can see when we take a look at this global overview that Europe has a focus on being competitive, being sovereign, being fair and interoperable. The US is, well, they have to deal with their societal issues and on racial discrimination and just bias into the algorithm, whereas China is focusing more on national security, an extensive use of facial recognition. We're talking about 600 to 800 millions of cameras implemented in China that use and are being used for facial recognition. And they use it for maintaining the public order and moderation, censorship of the communications. Because today our audience is a bit more European, I decided to focus on one central act for artificial intelligence. I think you all have heard and probably know the EU AI Act, Artificial Intelligence Act. And I wanted just to make clear where do we stand as of today, because it's not always easy to understand how the European legislation works. So basically, what happened and what will happen. In April 2021, the European Commission proposed a draft. So they came up with the first version of a text and they proposed it to the European Commissions and to the Council of the EU. What happened is that the various agencies of the European Union provided their opinions, or at least the ones that are affected by it, provided opinions, providing an idea of what they thought the text should contain or should regulate, etc. So that's why we had in December, February, and March 21 and 22 opinions from the European Economic and Social Committee, from the European Committee of the Regions, and from the European Central Bank, where they all took a stance regarding the use of artificial intelligence in their own domain. For the European Central Bank, it was actually a very big debate, and it's worth noting it was more or less implied in the first draft, or at least that's what some people understood, that the European Central Bank could use its position to become a supervisory authority for the AI systems in Europe, at least for the market, because they are supervising the market. They could also supervise the rules applying to the market. So they, in their opinion, really specified that they would not take this position. Then what happened is that in January this year, actually it was voted in June last year, drafted in December and published in January, the European Parliament did amendments, 700 modifications to the draft. And then they will discuss it with the Council of the European Union. The Council of the European Union is basically the ministers of technology from each member state that will gather together and form the Council of the European Union and discuss back and forth with the European Parliament to agree to a final version together. This is what is called the first reading. If they do not come to an agreement, then there is a second reading, which is usually shorter, and where they will discuss once more until they come to a final agreement. We are now only in the first part of the first reading. The Council of the EU didn't provide yet their amendments, but it is expected that the Council of the EU and the European Parliament come to an agreement before June 2024. Why? because in June 2024 will be the European elections for the parliament. So new member of parliaments will be elected. And the thing is that if it is not agreed by this timeline, the publication and the entry into force of the act will be probably prolonged by 1 or 2 years, because new members will mean that they will need to get into, and they won't vote on text on the previous assembly. So that's why we expect, and everyone is trying to work on having something by June 2024. And if everything goes well, then we should expect the entry into force in 2025 of the EU AI Act. So that's for the European Union. How it is and how do we stand right now regarding the EU AI Act. You can see that we hear for 3 years now about the EU AI Act. We are close to that, but we are not yet there, so it's not yet applicable, whereas some rules are already applicable in the US and in China. So what does it mean? If we take a look at the regulation at its global level, there are some common elements that come and that will put that come and put requirements on certain organizations. And these requirements are as follows. So first, every single approach requires necessarily internal audits and their publication on an annual basis. It also means that you need to have third-party audits on an annual basis from independent third parties, or sometimes from the supervisor itself, like for example in China. There needs to be proactive reports to the supervisory authority. In Europe, for example, the EU AI Act is planning on establishing a new European Union Artificial Intelligence Board that will be the supervisory authority for Europe, and that will have its counterpart in each member state. Exactly the same way of working as for GDPR, where you have the European Data Protection Board, and then you have the national data protection authorities, like the Autoriteitspersoonsgegevens in the Netherlands, or the CNIL in France, and so on. We have requirements in each model, a requirement to publish to the public and to the users the results of the audits in a clear and understandable manner. So there is a requirement of transparency. There is also a transparency on which model are being used. So even if you are not providing yourself an AI service, but you make use of certain AI services, then you will need to communicate about which foundation model, such as Llama, OpenAI, Mistral, that you are using in your company. You will need, of course, to always make sure that that individuals can exercise their rights. There is always a requirement for human intervention, whether it's in China, in Europe, and in the US. And then finally, we are quite sure that there will be risk management framework requirements set up by the European Union and the US already, and for China at the local level, such as, for example, in Shanghai, there is already a standard going on. So, quite a lot of impact only at the global level on how it affects already the organization. So first you see that you have 3 different models that you need to comply depending on which market you're focusing, or if you are already global, then you need to make sure that you comply with all this legislation. But also you have a whole new let's say proactive demonstration requirement, where you need to publish your results to multiple new stakeholders, supervisory authorities, users, but also third-party auditors. So how do we do it within Anove? Within Anove, we already, let's say, noticed that we need to have this a response to this hyper legislation or inflation of the legislation. So that's why basically we have in our tool a way of monitoring all this legislation that I am mentioning. So whether we are talking about European AI Act or the US bill for artificial intelligence, we have everything. You basically set them into the scope of your company, and then you are able to monitor your performance against these requirements. And because you need to report on them, you need to demonstrate that you are in control. That's why we also have a functionality where you can go to your regulation that is into your scope, and you can generate a compliance statement. So basically, you say, if I replay the video here, here I will go to the Swift architecture type 1 for the cloud service providers for Swift, and I'm generating a compliance statement. And what it does is that it takes all the relevant measures into my company, aggregates them into the report, and then generates the report, so that way, for example, if Swift is asking me how are you looking at, or if I have a supplier asking me how do I perform regarding Swift, then I can provide this information immediately. And finally, we provide a way of monitoring your security measures and your measures in general directly against into the tool. So where you can see per legislation or per standards how you are performing. You can see your average maturity and your results regarding these different frameworks. So now that we have seen, let's say, how are we standing in terms of global level, we can dive into how does it work for the organizations themselves. So what are the risks and opportunities for the organizations? To do that, we decided to use the methodology that we use at Anove. We decided to start with a SWOT analysis. So a SWOT for a regular organization on how does AI, or let's say, how can we implement AI, or if we implement AI, how does it affect our organizations? Are we ready for it? What are our strengths, weakness, and how does it affect also the market? So our strengths internally, at least for a regular organization, are usually, well, resource availability, because AI is such a trending topic that you will have additional resources. That's often the case when you have a new technology like this that needs to be implemented. Some companies, let's say, missed the internet revolution, or at least were quite late. I think a lot of these companies nowadays wants to be on top of the AI revolution. Companies with a long established have also their whole data structure. Now that we are already in the digital era, meaning that it's already a strength for nourishing the artificial intelligence systems that you will be providing. So if it's well done, then you will be able to quickly collect the hanging fruits of the implementation of artificial intelligence. And then the majority of the organization, I think, at least from what we see at Anove, is majority of the organization have a real culture of innovations. And especially in the Netherlands, where I see that the majority of the organizations wants to embrace artificial intelligence, a lot of people see the advantages. That's why I usually spend less time on talking about what are the benefits, but also what is the impact. But of course, most of the organization also have some weaknesses, and they are common. First, there is a big skill gap. There is often very limited availability of knowledge regarding artificial intelligence. So it means that either we need to train or to hire at additional expense. There can be also resistant to change in employees. This is especially regarding people who might see artificial intelligence as a replacement for their role. We were talking about changes that it will bring to the roles. We see that 14% will be replaced, although most of the time what was mentioned in the report is more in the agricultural field, where AI can replace, for example, people, but it will affect about 32% of the roles. So we need to have our workforce to embrace artificial intelligence and make sure that they also gain the knowledge to use artificial intelligence. And then, well, a weakness is that there is no central artificial intelligence management. There is no central AI repository. And that's something that will be required at some point. So knowing what are the different use cases of artificial intelligence within the company, based on which foundation model, and so on. Opportunities and threats. So regarding the market externally, of course, opportunity, I could list many of them, and I think you know quite some of them. We have, expanding the market, of course, and enhancing our services, productivity gain, because we can significantly increase our value-added production. You can focus your time more on high-value activity and automate a lot of your monotonous and repetitive tasks. And then, of course, reducing the operational costs. For the threats, of course, while right now we are in a big change and an effervescence of regulations, so there's a lot of regulatory change. There will be additional requirements for companies that use AI and that are linked to AI. There is a competitive pressure. If you don't do it, your competitors will do it. That's at least the perception that there is. And there is also still a problem of perception by the public. I think we have a sort of schizophrenic approach to AI where we are both excited but also a bit scared because we don't necessarily grasp the entirety of its effect, of its impact on both our organization but also on society. So we are really at the beginning. So from this SWOT analysis, at least we are capable of understanding, okay, AI will definitely affect my organization. I see that there is something, but at least now I can see, okay, that of course I have some strength and some opportunities to do it, some incentives, but I also need to deal with with my weaknesses and also deal with the threats. If we focus a bit more onto the risk part, so governance, risk, and compliance on the risk management part, I think it is important to list some general risks related to artificial intelligence, both for society, but also for our organization. So, of course, this is a list of 14 risks that we have established and that is available into our tool for example, directly implementing them into your risk management, into your risk register, for example. So, of course, we have lost of jobs because of higher automation. We have, of course, bias links to the way the algorithm, the AI are being trained. Unclear regulations. We saw that there's 3 conceptual models and all working differently. And we are still, some laws, for example, EU AI Act, are being talked about all the time, but not yet passed. We have misalignment, usually between the goals of the organization and the goal of the AI that is being developed. Implementing AI for the sake of implementing AI is never a good idea. It's actually worse for any technology, but especially with AI. There is a lack of transparency in the foundation models. So for now, I think most companies that use AI, they don't necessarily disclose on which model they rely on. For example, at Anove, we rely on the Mistral foundation model, where basically we decided to choose for this one because first it's open source, but also it's being provided by a European provider. So it might be maybe underperforming, but on the other hand, we gain this sovereignty in terms of geopolitics. There is, of course, bias. This is also a big problem that will come up, is because developers and especially AI specialists are so scarce that they will have a big power and a big impact on your organization. And if they have a negative impact, then this impact will be decoupled. Of course, loss of control in the decision-making process. A lot of people will rely on artificial intelligence without necessarily thinking about what is being provided. There is, of course, privacy violations of the employees We see a lot, for example, AI being used for HR matters, potential violation of privacy for customers if you don't collect your data properly, or there might be even data leaks. Of course, big fines for non-compliance. The EU AI Act, to come back to this one, is with the new amendment of the European Parliament, is taking a stance at 50 million euros of fine, or 7% of the annual turnover, which is 2.5 times more than GDPR, so way higher, and it's whatever is the highest. So it's either 50 million or 7%. So when you are, for example, Google or Apple, that might be quite problematic. Of course, you have external malicious actors that also have access to AI and that already exists. So malicious AI, such as WormGPT or Darkbird, that allow you to create right away malwares and try to infect organization. So if you have access, yeah, definitely actors probably already have access to it. We'll have evolved social engineering with deep fakes, with analytics of the behavior of your employees that might lead to, well, more evolved social engineering. And then, of course, lack of transparency and inaccuracy of the data that is being generated. I mentioned that most of the time, the results that come out needs to have an expert eye to make sure that they are correct. In law, for example, we have noticed a lot of cases, and there is even now a case in New York about a lawyer who used an AI to help them in establishing their case, and they cited a case that never existed, and they are now looking at potentially being disbarred. So that's quite that would be a first, and that would be quite a harsh sanction for the incorrect use or inaccurate use of artificial intelligence. So now we looked at, okay, our organizations, we have a SWOT. Are we ready for implementing artificial intelligence? We look at the general risk of artificial intelligence, what we can take into account. And now let's take a look at our GRC program. So the challenges for a GRC are as such. Well, we always work on 3 levels. We work first on the strategic level. So we just saw that we have additional risk that will be generated by AI. So all the previous ones, the 14 ones and more that I have just listed, but also current risk that will need to be reassessed. Typically, for example, malicious actors where at ransomwares, for example, were an existing risk, but you need to reassess it in the light that maybe there will be a higher impact or even a higher likelihood because of artificial intelligence. Same for data leaks, same for consequences of employees sharing data, etc., etc. There is additional compliance. We saw an additional burden, new sets of regulations that needs to be complied to, that needs to be executed, monitored, and reported on. And there is, of course, this creation of potentially a new silo. That is because it's a new topic with a very big gap of knowledge. And to be honest, who really understands how artificial intelligence works? At least we all know more or less what it is, how it works, but deeply, I don't think a lot of people really understand how it works. On the tactical level, there will be additional impact assessments and risk assessment, focusing specifically on artificial intelligence. Most of the frameworks we see as of today, for example, the NIST AI risk management framework already requires impact assessment. Most of the local US regulation also requires impact assessment. The regulations in the EU, whether it's the EU AI Act, the DMA or the DSA, Digital Market Act or Digital Service Act, require companies to perform a risk assessment and impact assessment on the use of AI. And same in China, where the risk management framework also requires impact assessment. Audits and communication, more audits on the use of AI and sharing these results publicly. So not only with your B2B landscape, but also with your B2C. More data security and privacy. It's increased the risk of leaking your business data, your proprietary data. And more procedures, more policies, more standards that will need to be created, or your current policies will need to be updated. So far, I think all of this can be guessed pretty easily. And then finally, at operational level, in terms of really actions, it means that we'll need to implement additional technical measures, such as, for example, measures of managing the bias, of sanitizing the data, making sure that there are no discriminations, making sure that the results are reliable and accurate, and if not, that there are some mechanism to prevent from issues arising from the results. They will need to assess third parties. So we need, and that's what we see also in this three conceptual model of AI, the whole digital supply chain is held accountable. So not only the AI providers, but also the ones who use AI needs to report on their use of AI. It also means new evidence collection, because we have new requirements, new audit, new measures, new policies. All of this leads to collecting even more data. And then finally, we will need to train the personnel, first on the impact of the use of AI, two, on how to use the AI, and three, maybe also how does AI work. So that will also generate quite a lot of work. Well, quite a lot of negative points, but I always like to go on also with the positive aspects for specifically GRC. In our case, there will be a lot of pros in the using AI, and actually Anove also uses AI for its own tool. Evidence-based risk collection will make it easier with machine learning, with data analytics. Automated risk management, where we basically can manage the various risks related to third parties, but also maintaining certain resilience, helping you in making decisions at a strategic level. It helps you transitioning from what we call traditional risk management, which is basically based on manual input, to what is called dynamic risk management, where dynamic risk management, you even forecast based on your current state where you will stand in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So you forecast your risk posture, and it allows you to take action before you reach this level, maybe potential critical level. And of course, automation of a lot of tasks, but also automation of your compliance task. So by analyzing the changes, and that's what we do, analyzing the changes in the regulations, in the standards, in the frameworks, and making sure that we stay up to date all the time. And there's even much more: detection of duplicates, detection of patterns for over or under testing, reduction of false positive, because we talk about GRC in a whole. We're talking about potential false positive reduced in anti-money laundering or in KYC, know your customers. Predictive planning and analysis, policy management, even potentially policy writing. Reducing time also to answer your compliance questionnaires, if you need to apply to RFPs, or if you have suppliers asking you that can help you. It helps you in responding to these questionnaires, and simply gaining more insight into your data. If you connect your data in the right way, and the way that we're trying to do it at Anove, then you can get a lot more information and share it with all the relevant stakeholders. And that's why with Anove, we integrate right now artificial intelligence, because we think that, of course, there is a lot of challenges, but challenges doesn't mean that they can't be solved. And we see all the benefits are really, really important. So the way we do it is that, for example, we use artificial intelligence. So we have our Anove AI, Anove Artificial Intelligence, that help us in defining risks that are pertinent for our organization. In this case, for example, I am a bank, Bing Bank, so I am in the banking sector, in the financial sectors, and I ask, okay, please help me generate risk related to artificial intelligence. What it does is that then it will create 5 different risks related to the assets and to the information that I already have, and then I will be able to directly import it into my risk register. The second part where we use AI, and I mentioned it before, is for dynamic risk management. So risk management based on input is good, but it's better when you can foresee where you will stand in a couple of months. So that's why with Anove we also have 3 types of risk management scores. We have, of course, the gross and the net. So the gross being the risk as it is now, the net being the risk once it's being treated, and then the normalized risk score, which is basically the risk as it is now, taking into account the risk treatment measures that have been mentioned, but also how accurate and how followed up they are. So if, for example, someone is not following up on their on a risk mitigation measures that they should have performed, for example, 2 weeks ago, then your normalized risk score will show you, hey, someone was supposed to perform an action and it has not been performed, and of course you see your risk score evolving. And then finally, we were talking about evidencing because we have this whole administrative burden and this whole new requirements that we need to comply to. We try also to collect the most relevant data, and that's why we connect through APIs. We connect to valuable source of information. In that case, for example, I'm showing an example of how we connect to Azure Sentinel, where we collect the information about Azure Sentinel, we link it to our controls, and then we will be able to see the results generated from Azure Sentinel, and we can have access to a whole dashboard of information where you see your incident overview, your alerts, and so on and so on. So it's also being used for automating the evidencing of our controls. So if we take a look at all our challenges, at least that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to solve all of them with our application. So to finish on this webinar, and then we can go on to the question and answers, the Q&A, just a couple of steps on how you can prepare yourself for artificial intelligence. First, you need to assess at the strategic level the impact of artificial intelligence, performing a SWOT. That's what we did before. Then we need to align our current objective with the integration of AI. Why do we want to use AI? Where can we use it, etc. Then we need to add AI and the AI risk management into our current scope. That we have done by implementing it and putting it in a scope and implementing it into our company. Then we can rely on our existing controls where we can map our existing security, our existing measures to the new requirement and see our coverage of the new AI risk management. We can leverage on existing roles, and that's something that is underlying in Anove, is that we connect the DPOs, the security officers, the compliance officers, the risk officers, but also the board and the technical officers all together so that we use the data as a central point. We contextualize it for the various roles so that everyone can understand understand the logic behind it. And then finally, we collect the evidence for all the audits requirements once so that we can show our compliance to multiple requirements at the same time. That's what we call the test once, comply to many. And finally, to reply to this requirement from external organizations, whether it's supervisory authorities, whether it is your suppliers or any other customer, for example, we generate inked control statements, and you need to proactively report on the results of your audits and also on your performance. So, quite a lot of information, I know, but just to summarize, we saw 3 things. We saw first we have three emerging models of AI regulations. We have a whole geopolitics at stake, where sovereignty is definitely the core element, and that will lead to a drastic emergence, drastic increase in compliance requirements. We have a big modification of our risk landscape, whether it's new risk or existing risk, and we'll have a drastic change in the way of working. And we think at Anove that we need to embrace artificial intelligence. We need not only to see it as, of course, just a buzzword or just a way of doing things quickly, but it also allows us to do things in a smarter way. So that's why at Anove we really embrace artificial intelligence and embrace it especially in governance, risk, and compliance, so that it can really help us in doing more and in a smarter way. Thank you. I think now we can go to the question and answers. I didn't see anything, but I think it doesn't mean that there is nothing. Yes, I see a lot of.
We have.
Yes,
so we have a couple of
I didn't have
questions.
any modifications. But
yeah, so we have 10 minutes left to see if we have quite a lot of questions. I've already reviewed them, and I think there are a couple of very interesting ones. So we have one question from Stephanie asking, what are your reflections on the already existing AI risk frameworks? For instance, the ISO 42001 standard. And what factors should your organizers consider when incorporating this into your operations? So that's one question.
Yeah, that's a very good question indeed. I didn't mention it. Because of course of time issues. But yeah, actually consideration. Most of the time, and especially with ISO standards, you need to look at. First, you need to look at the standards, what they are asking for. But most of the time, they do not completely reinvent a way of working. You already have things that are being implemented, some measures that have been implemented, such as, for example, maybe the 4 I's principles that is relevant for coding might be also the same for training the data and training your models. So what my advice is, or let's say my approach would be to take a look at, I have, for example, an ISO 27001, I have an ISO 9001 for quality, and I want to implement an ISO 40001, then I will take a look at what does ISO 42001 requires, what I already have that matches this requirement, and I do that very simply, let's say, with Anove, where we have a mapping of this requirement from one to another, and then I see my coverage of what I already have, and then what's left, what is not being covered, will be taking all my resources so I can make sure that I focus on what really requires more energy. I hope this answers the questions, or if it was not, please let me know.
Yeah, another question that we have, Jean, is a very simple one. I think it was mentioned already quite at the beginning of the webinar, is how can I assess such a black box?
Sorry, what can you assess?
How can I assess such a black box?
Yes, I know that it's quite difficult and it seems very let's say esoteric to be able to assess it. Well, first, the new regulations, and I'm talking about EU AI Act, but it's not even yet in place. So leave it on the side because you can't really rely on it. But the Digital Market Act, Digital Service Act, they require the very big players, the very big tech providers to provide on request, or actually even to publish the results of audits and how they use their technology, what is being used in their technology, and who is involved. So first, relying on this report helps you in, let's say, bringing some light into this black box. The second part is, of course, you need to rely on AI experts, but there is a lot of documentation, because most of the AI systems nowadays are open source. So it means that everyone can access and analyze what's being done. You can rely on the documentation that is being provided by some security professionals. And then, well, that's for, let's say, for the European market. For the US market, there is already regulations imposing to American players to also share what are the foundation models and how do they act, and same actually in China. So you already have, normally you should already have access to this information, and if not, then you can remind them based on the regulations. But I know that most of the big players in AI, they already provide such reports.
Okay, thank you. Last question. There was a question about, you mentioned the in control statement that you can generate out of the Anove app. And there was a question, if you submit that to a supervisory body, the question is, do supervisory bodies already accept these statements? Because normally they form their own opinion via an independent audit. Yeah. Very good question, by the way.
Yeah, so that's indeed a very good question. So of course it is not enough, but it is because most of the time, I mean, if a supervisory authority wants to audit you, they will audit you. This doesn't have a value for an audit, but it already shows that you are in control. So that might even prevent you from the audit. I'm talking, for example, about data protection or about information security. So that's the first thing that might prevent you from an audit. But if you really need an audit, we also have auditors access to your data so that they can form their own opinion. But what we expect also in Anove is that because there is so many companies now that are digitalized and that have activities in the digital sector, and so few resources for the supervisory authority and so many requirements to monitor, that they will reverse the burden of proof. So instead of them going to you to get the information, you will need to provide your own statement to the authority. And if you're not being able to provide this own statement, this intermediary control statement, then you will have an investigation. It's exactly the same way that it has been done, for example, in finance, where you need to provide your accounts and you need to show that they have been done, and only if they are noticed that there's a problem or if they decide to investigate you, then you will have an audit. That's our take, at least at Anove, where we think that the supervisory authority and the regulatory authority will reverse the burden of proof. It's the same that happened, for example, with GDPR. They reversed before you had to tell. Now you have to have everything ready if they ask for it. Before, it was only based on an investigation basis.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have covered the majority of the questions, Jean, and so it's also time, because we have 1 minute left. So I would like to thank on behalf of you and all of Anove for everybody's presence. Last word is to you, Jean.
Last word to me. Well, thank you everyone for attending to this webinar. I hope that I gave you a new approach, not only yet another commercial webinar, but I also hope that you learned things too, or that I triggered at least your interest into how it can affect. And yes, I hope maybe to see you maybe very soon or talk to you. And don't hesitate to send me an email or to contact me on LinkedIn, so that we can exchange. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.